Okay, guys, welcome back. I thought I'd do a video on something that just keeps popping up all the time, and it's just something that people with four-wheel drives with solid axles just seem to have continuing issues with, and they find it very hard to, for some reason, diagnose and solve the problem, and that is the dreaded death wobbles. I'm not suffering with the death wobble at the moment. I did in my old car for a little while, but I was lucky enough to have a pretty cluey mate of mine that showed me how to diagnose it, and it literally takes 2 seconds to do, and as soon as I changed that component, problem solved, never had the issue again. Now this is an issue that affects all solid axle four-wheel drives, Land Cruisers, Nissan Patrols, things like that. In fact, I've even seen the new Ineos Grenadier have this issue in testing it. So I've noticed some footage, and there's been the axle just moving laterally just in the test vehicle. So it's very, very common amongst solid axle four-wheel drives. Okay, so what we'll do, in order to diagnose it, let's just give a quick rundown on what suspension components you've got under the front of a solid axle vehicle. So bearing in mind that this situation is brought in by the front steering components, not the rear steering components. So yeah, I'll give you a quick rundown on what is in the front of a solid axle four-wheel drive, and we'll go from there. Okay, so generally speaking, all solid axle four-wheel drives are pretty much the same. So up here you've got your thing called a pitman arm. Above that is the steering box, or the steering gearbox. Pitman arm is connected to this thing here. It's called a drag link. Okay, and what that does is that connects the pitman arm from the steering box to the swivel hubs or steering knuckles, whatever you want to call them. Between both sides of the vehicle, you've got this thing here called a tie rod that links the right and left sides together, directly together. You've got a steering dampener here. Mine's a bit bashed up, as you can see. Often people will say, "Oh, just change the steering dampener," but you won't actually fix the problem by changing the steering dampener. But what you will do is you'll partially mask the problem. Now, additionally, what you've got here, it's a major contributor to the death wobble, is this thing here, which is your panhard rod or track bar. Well, it doesn't contribute to it, but that can be one of the causes. Now, you'll notice that every single one of these components is linked by some sort of ball joint or bushing, if it's got a bolt through it like that, or some sort of joint. Now, the problem is when you hit a bump, if any of those components are worn, what'll happen is there'll be a slight vibration, and because the front left and right wheels are linked, you'll end up with that oscillation through the wheel. So you get a bit of vibration, it'll send the vibration across to the other side, and you'll end up with that wobbling from side to side. Now, one of the biggest contributors to this issue is this thing called the track bar, because the track bar's actual job is to stop the whole axle from moving from left to right. Now, why it's so common for that to be the problem is if the bushings, which is like a rubber sleeve that goes over these bolts, if that's worn out, that can, what will happen is you end up with a bit of play, and then if there's play and there's movement left and right, you'll end up with the whole axle wobbling left and right, and then you'll have your obvious death wobble. Now, that can happen with any of these ball joints as well. If any of them are worn out, you're going to have that same issue. What we need to do is actually diagnose the problem. So the way we can do that is we'll get someone behind the wheel for us. All we need to do is stick their head under the front of the car, get that person to wiggle the steering wheel from left to right, and you should be able to see what's got play in it, what's clunking and banging in there. Anything that's sort of clunking and banging is probably going to be a problem. So what I'm going to do in this circumstance, I haven't got someone else with me, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put the camera under the car and just wiggle the steering wheel from left to right, and see if we're going to see if anything is moving around. Okay, so make sure when you're doing this, it's on a nice flat level surface, or chock the wheels if you need to, and making sure you're doing it nice and safe. What you're looking for is any play in any of those components, any unusual clunking and banging that could cause a problem.
Now if you want, you can also use a pry bar to manipulate some of those components. Again, just looking for any kind of play.
Okay, so how do we actually fix it? Well, with most cars now, and if you were to take it back to Jeep and said, oh, my bushings are worn or my ball joints are worn, what they'll do is they'll swap out that component. Now that can get a bit expensive, especially for things like panhard rods, and they'll, rather than swap out the bushings, they'll replace the whole panhard rod, and they'll tell you it's, you know, $500-600 for a panhard rod. However, you can actually replace that with aftermarket components that are generally cheaper, probably better quality, and later on down the track, those bushings are exchangeable. So that's just something to think about. How do we actually avoid it? Well, I don't think you can actually completely avoid it, because essentially it just comes down to wear and tear on the vehicle. But there are some things that do sort of prematurely bring it on. One of the common things that might bring it on is lifting your vehicle without loosening your bolts and stuff as part of the process. So if you don't loosen off your bolts when you lift the vehicle, you replace the springs, the vehicle's going to be sitting at a different height, and your bushings are going to be under heaps of stress, and they're going to stay under stress the whole time the vehicle's just driving around, and you'll end up just ripping through them, and they'll be just destroyed real quick. Other thing that's going to bring it on is, you know, lots of mud driving, sand driving, things like that, where muck and stuff can work its way into the bushings and ball joints and end up wrecking your components that way. So, you know, yes, off-roading probably is going to bring it on earlier. Now, additionally, even some people have got brand new vehicles from the factory, and they've only had the vehicle for a few weeks, and they end up with death wobble, and they're thinking, what's going on? You know, the car's brand new. It may not be worn components, it may just be some loose components. So take it back to your dealer, make sure that all of those ball joints and everything's all tightened up to spec, and hopefully that should fix your problem. Now, if you're still watching at this point, it's much appreciated. Do me a favor, click the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, share it with your friends, and click the bell icon. It's a lot of things to actually do, but it generally helps the channel. So yeah, until next time, thanks for watching.